Konnichiwa, and welcome to the Samurai Way, the podcast where we dive into the wisdom of the samurai, the art of Japanese living, and the philosophies that help us live with purpose and perseverance. I'm Lori Sagawa, and whether you're here to explore Bushido, uncover the meaning of Ikigai, or just looking for a little extra gambaru, never give up spirit in your daily life, you're in the right place. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's walk this path together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Konnichiwa, minasan. I am Lori Sagawa, and welcome to the Samurai Way podcast. I'm so glad you're here, so be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends about the Samurai Way, because there's so much you can learn from the samurai and the Japanese culture, and that's what I'm passionate about. So I hope you will enjoy the ride, and we have a special guest with us. Her name is Saori Okada, and she's from England. She'll be telling all of you about herself and her journey, but she is a UKIHA registered health coach, Japanese calligraphy artist, and practicing under her gifted name, Sei-Sen. She's a founder of Mogami, a wellness center in London, and rooted in the philosophy of traditions of Japanese wellness. After a 15-year struggle with various eating disorders, Saori turned to holistic practices to rebuild her relationship with herself. And I found that interesting. Most people like to build a relationship with food, but she built it with herself. Today, her work invites others to return to themselves, to find balance, beauty, and meaning in every day, and to remember that the tools for well-being and harmony already exist within. So right now we have our special guest Saori with us, and please welcome to the show, Saori.
Thanks, Lori, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I think, something I like to say, I have a New Yorker's mind and Japanese soul. So I grew up in Tokyo, but in my 20s, I lived in New York and I had a corporate career there. So I always say that hopefully my vision is to share authentic Japanese teachings in a way that is easily digestible to the global audience.
And I appreciate that, because that's what I really want to find and practice and speak everything. Is it Nihon, Honto ni Nihon, the true Japanese? And I want to do that. I don't want to say samurai. You won't hear that from me. It's samurai or samurai. Yeah. So the first topic that we wanted to cover was finding meaning in everyday moments. For example, Ikigai, arigato, itadakimasu.
Yeah, so I thought we would talk, this would be an important part for us to talk about, because sometimes I feel like we try to find meaning in the big goals. For example, maybe you're chasing something, you're trying to achieve certain things. And what I learned from personal experience as well is that, those goals or achievements are sometimes empty pursuits. And it's actually more important to find meaning in the everyday moments. And so what I mean by that is, just for a personal story, I worked in New York. I had a corporate career. I was achieving a lot of the things that I thought would make me happy. So, I had a good job. I lived in a great city. I was, making a good salary, all these goals that I was trying to check off. And then I had to be honest with myself and say, I achieved them, but I actually didn't really find meaning. I felt very empty inside. And then I think that's when I really actually tried to take a look at what I grew up with in my Japanese roots to see if there was some lessons that I can lean on. And I think you mentioned Ikigai, Lori, and, Ikigai is probably a really well-known concept now, but hopefully people know that it's not the Venn diagram that people think it is, but it's actually more about that quiet force that brings joy and meaning to your everyday life. And it doesn't have to be tied to your profession. So I think that's something that I would love everyone to think about, because the Venn diagram specifies that your purpose in life has to be your job. But the like 本当の日本語, as you said, Lori, or like the real definition is really more about, you know, what is it in your life, personal, professional, that gets you out of bed? Or, what are you excited about? What brings you joy? And I think it's more about leaning in towards those types of feelings versus trying to get, purpose out of equation per se, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
That does make sense. And I think the Venn diagram is very well known, but as I studied it more, I said, this really isn't what it's about. So I kept searching and finding ways and people that I resonated with. So that was more exciting than to go down this Venn diagram road, we'll call it. And so I hope people will understand after today that it is not the Venn diagram. And so we have an expert here to share more with you. I'm so excited. Um, could you explain itadakimasu? Because some people know about it. And I mean, I know about it, but I'd like to hear what
Yes.
you think.
Yeah. So itadakimasu is you probably, if you ever go to Japan, you'll hear a lot of people saying it. And it's something that we say at the beginning of a meal. And, it roughly translates to I humbly receive. But I think that it's actually a moment of mindfulness and gratitude because we are saying we humbly receive and we are giving thanks to the person that made the food, the person that helped, bring the food to life. So maybe that's the farmers, maybe that's the fishermen. It's the people that actually helped grow this food that we're about to eat. And then it also includes, thanking the food itself. And so, when we keep all of that in mind, it actually helps us, be more mindful and grateful for the fact that
Mhm.
we have this delicious meal. And, I think in my coaching works, we talk a lot about like healthy eating habits. And something that I always ask is, are you are you watching something while you're eating? For example, a lot of people will say yes, maybe you're watching a show or maybe you're like listening to something, and they're not really paying attention to what you're eating, which is a shame because I think when we actually are more mindful, we could actually experience it with so much more gratitude. And it's better for you, but also it reminds us that we're much more of a than ourselves. It's a community. So it really gives back more again to the topic of trying to find meaning in the everyday moments because we should never take that for granted.
I stayed at one hotel about a year and a half ago, and I just loved it because I could tell these ladies that were making the little onigiris, and they had all these different toppings, and that was their purpose. I mean, they were just they just loved doing that and making the little onigiris, and they knew what I liked, and they knew I didn't want to eat my rice first. I tend to eat it
Mhm.
towards the end, and they always gave me extra noti because I don't want to get my fingers sticky. So plus I like the I think it tastes good. But anyway, that's one thing I just really appreciate about Japan is they say one of the secret ingredients is love. That they take
Mm,
so much care and pride in preparation, and you don't tip the waitresses or anybody in the restaurant. They consider that their duty, their job is to serve.
yes, I love that. And the last thing that comes to mind was when you say that, like the idea of omotenashi. And even, it means wholehearted service, where it's basically you are giving the best service that you can to an individual without, the intention of getting something back, like you mentioned, but also there's no like, bad intentions behind it. You're actually giving your whole heart, which I love because I feel like to me, that's how I try to, you could see it and feel it when you go to Japan. And I think it really comes
Yes.
out in that way when I love your onigiri example because that's like very spot on in terms of, that omoterashi spirit.
And on my last day, I gave them a box of applets and cutlets, and they actually hugged me and they go, "Oh, thank you so much." They go, "Oh," and I didn't wrap it purposely so I could just give it to them, and they just really liked it because it's kind of like be like yokon, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, I love that.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to know if you would expound on the thing that I thought was really interesting, rebuild your relationship with yourself rather
Mm.
than food. And kind of goes along with Ikigai, I think.
Yes, no, that's a great point. So, I mentioned that I had various years of battling with various eating disorders. And, I think for me, what I found to be like the root cause of that was that I had to build a better relationship with myself, like you mentioned, meaning I had to try to figure out who I was as a person and learn how to love myself really and be okay with who I am as a person. Because I think, when I looked at my relationship with food, it wasn't necessarily like the root cause, it was a symptom. And it was because I was, more of a perfectionist. I was very hard on myself. And until I really figured that out and I built a stronger relationship with myself that was rooted in authenticity, that was rooted in kindness and love, like I wouldn't have been able to, be where I am today. So I think in the work that we do here and even with Ikigai, like, it's Ikigai can only be come to the service when you have a strong, authentic definition of who you are. And so I think every time I talk about the work that we do at Mogami, it always starts with, having that healthy, grounded relationship with yourself, because I don't think we take enough time to really understand who we are today.
Good point. I like that. Thank you so much. And then also, one other point you wanted to bring out was embracing imperfection and change. Wabi Sabi, Ichigo, Ichie.
Yes. I mean, I think this is a great tie into, I always say I'm like a recovering perfectionist. I had such high standards for myself. And it really cost me in terms of my overall well-being, So Wabi Sabi is this idea that we use nature as the ultimate form of what is authentic. And if we think about nature, it's not necessarily perfect, it's not permanent, and it's never done. And so we should follow the same principles as well, meaning if we are to be authentic, we are to celebrate the fact that we are not perfect. We are not permanent, meaning we are always changing. Think about the seasons of nature. This is very much who we are as well. And we are never done. So this kind of helps us let go of this idea that we have to achieve certain things to be enough. And so it's really about that acceptance piece that I think is so beautiful. And I think we could all really learn to embrace this, because I honestly think that we all are too hard on ourselves and we cannot let go of this idea that we're meant to be perfect. We're supposed to stay the same. We're not good enough until we achieve certain things. These are simply not true. And I think that it's about unlocking that idea to really be more free, be ourselves.
Uh-huh. It also kind of reminds me of Kintsugi, the bending broken pottery, and the story behind that is really interesting. But when you see these pieces that are mended with gold, they're actually beautiful.
Yes, yes. No, I absolutely, I always say like Kintsugi is like a reflection of Wabi Sabi in a way,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a
Okay.
visual like appreciation for that. And you're absolutely right, where I feel like it's actually celebrating, um, you know, us and our challenges is what makes us even more beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds, this is just a side story, but when I had to write about the accident that I was in '05 and '07, I said I was like Humpty Dumpty being on the wall and falling
Mm,
down and then putting it myself back to had put myself back together again. But it took a lot of people. It took a speech pathologist,
mm,
a chiropractor, a physiatrist, you name it. I just went through all kind. Oh, and the speech pathologist. I had not one, but I had two. So I
mm,
just did a lot of work, and I know a lot about the brain now. So March we're going to be covering traumatic brain injury, because that's the National Traumatic Brain Injury Month is March.
mm,
Yeah,
mhm,
so it's kind of, that's how I remind me. Or the other one I did was like a window. A ball goes through the window, it gets all shattered and had to be put back together, and piece by
mhm.
piece I was put back together again, and now I can read, and then some. I write now, but I was reading it at such a low level, junior high level, that I had to do something. I didn't want to stay that position.
Yes, no, that's amazing. Yeah, and I do think it is about like rebuilding yourself and I don't know if you know like do you know the Daruma-san? It's like a red doll
Oh
that you
yes,
can
uh-huh.
find. Yes, and the meaning behind that is that it will never fall down basically because it always has the ability to come back up, and that's why it's actually in that round shape, because it's this idea that like we are all very resilient and we have that ganbaru idea. And so I think that's like also a beautiful like representation of as well, because I think it means that like we are so resilient and we have that ability.
Mhm.
So you have the spirit for it.
Yes, and I think I think you think about what happened in the 2011, the tsunami. I mean, the Japanese people are very resilient, and they've had to be because there's this little island country, and most of it's uninhabitable. They live in such tight quarters, and they have so many people, but they do it in a beautiful way. That's like, if you see go down to the train stations at work hours, you can see how they've had to adjust and adapt, and they can't be pushy or that kind of. Everybody lines up, everybody except for that time they push people into those cars, but they have had to adapt, and that's why they live the way they do. And you won't see litter there in Japan much, and it's beautiful. I love it. I love talking about it. It's really my happy place, even though I'm couple generations away from Japan. I remember my grandmother, and I just remember all the things that the Japanese people did, and I just loved it.
Yes. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing is, we can talk a little bit more about embracing imperfection and change, because I think a lot, like you say, I think a lot of people find that, and that they always think, oh, I'm not good enough if I was this, if I was that. Well, we're all nobody's perfect. So we have to come up. Nobody's perfect. And there isn't a perfect world. And everywhere you go, you won't find perfect people everywhere, but um, everything changes, I think, like you say.
Yes, yes. And I think it's an important exercise to like think about how this idea of perfectionism or this idea of feeling like, trying to stay the same is holding you back. And so I always encourage people to take a moment right now, if you're listening, to really reflect and see, like, are there moments in my life right now that I feel like this sense of, perhaps it's anxiety or the sense of pressure that you put on yourself for certain aspects of perfectionism, because I think maybe it shows up at work. Does it show up in your personal relationships? Does it show up with, how you treat yourself or how you talk to yourself? Because I think it's very different for everyone. But it's about building that awareness. So I think it's really important for us to think about that and then understand this idea of Wabi Sabi, but also so many different elements within this idea of letting go and embracing the seasons, and then trying to implement small ways of thinking. It could be a mindset shift. It could be a small action that you could take that's going to help us release a little bit of the pressure that we put on ourselves.
Mhm. Kind of reminds me of, you're way too young for this, but I was growing up when Barbie was first introduced. And if
Mm-hmm.
she were in real life, no, she couldn't have those proportions. She couldn't be that perfect. And I think they try to make little girls think that, oh, you need to be like Barbie. Well, nobody can be like her. Nobody. I think it's so funny, but that idea of perfection. But what I love about the Japanese culture is they embrace age, they embrace wisdom. They're not throwing out the old people. They're two or three sometimes three generations live in a home. That was in one of our relatives. We saw that, and it happens. The people we visited on Tokushima, three generations lived in that. Well, actually, it was like a compound, and he's the
Mm.
13th generation that's part of that farm, and he's going to continue farming. he doesn't know if his son is because his son doesn't like it, but his daughters do. I think it's kind of funny.
No, actually,
So,
I really love your point about respecting elders. And I do think
mhm.
that's something that we see in a lot of Asian countries, but also in Japan as well. And there's a day called like Keiro no Hi, which is, like respecting the elderly. And I think you could see that in everyday um, conversation. The way that we talk to like elderly is a form of respect in Japanese. And so there is actually this idea that the older that you get, the more wisdom that you gain, and there's actually so much that we could gain from our older generations through having thoughtful, meaningful
Oh, yes.
conversations. And so
Hmm.
I do think it's like Lori, that's a great point, and I hope that we could take that in as well, because if we think about people around us, I'm sure there's people that we could like have conversations with that can like gift us with wisdom and just through the years that they've gained.
And building inner strength through stillness, energy, and discipline. I'd like to know how you teach that in your practice.
Yes, yes. Well, I think stillness is a really important concept in this today, because I find that modern life is fast, it's loud, it's overstimulating in a way. If we just think about, for example, how many times we are exposed to social media, or we're checking our phone, or we have constant streams of news or alerts and communication that we have to do. It is normal to feel overwhelmed. So if you feel overwhelmed, I think that's absolutely normal. I feel like we're not meant to have, for example, 10, 20 systems talking to us at once.
No,
Yes. And so I feel overwhelmed constantly when I'm exposed to this as well. So I feel like we need to learn how to slow down, and we need to learn how to pause. And it's actually very counterintuitive, because I feel like nowadays it's more like more, faster, instant. These are like things that you probably hear, but
uh-huh.
there's so many beautiful wisdom concepts just with staying still. So, this idea of ma, which is all about the space between things. It's this idea that meaning is found in the spaces that we allow it to. And, how often do we give ourselves the gift of pause?
Yeah, that's very
Probably
good.
not a lot. Yeah. And so, like,
Probably.
yeah. Yeah. And it's like such a simple but powerful concept. And so I always find that, like, where in your life, it could be in this conversation, even, can we create space? Can we create space in our everyday for us to take a deep breath? Those small moments actually can make so much more um, meaning in our life, because it helps ground us, but then it also helps us recenter ourselves and find really that, core principle that I was talking about is like finding time for ourselves and building that relationship. You could only do that if you have the space to allow it to.
And I think by doing that, when you have conversations with people, that you bring in that stillness and to try to find out about the person instead of thinking about your retort, you will think about what is this person saying? What can I learn from him or her? How can I help him or her? And if we go into a conversation that way, rather than thinking about how we can show up and how we can have one up on somebody else, hopefully we'll learn past that. But that's not a good way to have a conversation. You don't person doesn't feel heard. The person doesn't feel valued. They think, oh well, I guess they really didn't listen to me. But I think listening is so important, and we get that through being still and pausing and not rushing ahead, because why rush ahead? There's everybody has the same amount of time, right? 24 hours in a day. And um, when you're talking about all this coming at you, there's so much coming at a person, but we need to just kind of shut that out sometimes. We need to use some discipline and not be on our phones during dinner and that kind of thing. So I think it's a good reminder. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yes, yes. No, and I think you'll find that in Japanese wellness or like culture, there's a lot of things that are tied to the beauty of spaciousness. And, there's this idea called like yutori, which is the feeling that one person has when they have that sense of spaciousness is you're actually, have this emotional and mental room to breathe. And even this idea of, the Japanese word for soda is like ku in Japanese if you write it. And it also means emptiness. So I always found this a beautiful visualization for me, because if we say that, if you look at the vast sky, it is beautiful, but it also gives us this sense of emptiness. And that could be very liberating for you. And I think it's about like, how can you find the feeling that you get when you look at like a beautiful open sky into your everyday? Because to me, it gives me such an ability to breathe, take a deep breath. And I think that's a beautiful way that we could try to start implementing that in our everyday.
And it does take discipline,
It does.
especially this day and age, because when you think about what's going on in social media and all, it's just so takes our attention away from one to the other. And they see that actually it's not good for the brain to watch those short things. It'd be better to watch a long movie than to those little short clips, because your mind is just racing all the time when you're watching that or listening to it.
Yes. And I think that's a great point where, sometimes it goes back to this idea of having patience for ourselves and knowing that discipline is something that happens in the everyday actions that we take. And I do think, I mean, Lori, I think a lot of your work is centered around having that discipline and sharing the Japanese way of discipline. But I think it's always about like starting small in the everyday, understanding that, one step at a time. I think Japanese culture really, really do try to remind ourselves of that, because, we understand that it's not going to take, it's not like change is going to happen overnight.
No, it doesn't. And speaking of the Japanese way and Japanese philosophies, would you like to share a little bit about your upcoming, well, kind of upcoming book? It's out in certain parts of the world, but not everywhere yet.
Yes, thank you. So my book, The Wisdom of Ancient Japan, Timeless Lessons to Live By, it is out in the UK in November, but I think hopefully it'll be more available around the world in the new year. But basically, it is 60 core concepts that are meant to empower your mind, body, and soul. And we talked about a little bit about some of them today, but really my intention with this book is that you don't have to be an expert in Japanese culture. And this is really for anyone that wants to have an introductory read in terms of some of the concepts that we talked about. So it includes everyday wisdom. It also includes things around discipline, along with things like mindfulness. And it really is hopefully a good way for you to read to get to know a Japanese culture a little bit more.
So, in a way, our conversation was kind of an introduction to your book, I think. I can't wait till it comes to the US. I'm sure it will eventually.
Yeah.
But I love the concept of it, just little short bites. But it's all, I think they all kind of work together, just like the Kodo Bushido works together, because you can't have courage if you don't have integrity or respect. Respect goes with hand in hand with all the other ones. They're so important, but how can you have one without the other? It's kind of hard, but I think they all work together. Courage, integrity, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty. And that is the way the samurai lived. And that's the way, and it's been handed down. And Japanese teach through actions, like my parents were farmers, and they taught me about hard work and discipline and, doing your best and everything you do. And they did it through having us work beside them in the fields. And my dad had at one time he'd have like 1,000 pickers come to his fields in buses. Can you imagine that? It would be chaos now, but way back when they could do that. They would pick up all these students on their summer break, and they would pick berries, and they would come and they would bring their lunches and they'd go back to their house. Can you imagine? That would be such a headache now. It'd be a liability. So my dad said actually after a while, when they changed the laws, he had to hire people, and it wasn't as successful. But there's some kids that came and they learned how to work. They bought their school clothes, they used it for their sports, and taught them really good values.
Yes. No, I love that story. And I think it does remind us that, change is not meant I think change is always happening through action. And the fact that your father had that insight to like show us, what it means to do it through the actions that we take, I think is very important. And so, even in my book, I think the goal is not to simply just read a concept, but there are some reflection questions or recommendations at the end of how you can try these principles out in your real life, because I think that's really when you can start living in that way where, instead of just reading about Ikigai, what does it mean if we live by Ikigai, for example?
And wouldn't that be an amazing world to live in when people find their Ikigai? I used to work in the prison when I was recovering from traumatic brain injury, and I would, when the ladies would get a little testy with me, I would, tell them, there was a time when my parents were illegally put behind where you are, but their existence was it was very sparse. It was very sparse, but they had to endure it, and they did it. And the way they endured it was just saying, this is what I'm going to do. And they did it without not a lot of writing or complaining. I just admire this first and second generation Japanese so much. And so I admired them so much that I wrote a lot about them in my book, because they lived exemplary lives, and there was hardly any crime among the first or second generation Japanese. And if they didn't want to be loyal to the US, they would go back to Japan, which is fine. But the ones that were here fought in the US Army, like 30,000 or a little bit more. And they were the highest, most highly decorated unit in US military history for its size and length of time in service. So that's my little thing about my father's generation. They were amazing people, and I admire them. We owe them so much. I feel they paved the way for us.
Absolutely. So well said.
So is there anything else you would like to, I hope that people are getting excited about this book, because I am. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we finish our conversation?
No, Lori, I think this was a really, hopefully people found this interesting. And, I think what I would love everyone to take away from this is that, I think that all the tools of finding purpose, of finding presence, it's not, out there in the world. I always find that it's in the everyday moments, and we have the ability to, bring that to life if we just give it the time that it deserves. So I really hope that people take that away from today's conversation, and take a minute or two to create that pause, to create that stillness, and figure out, what action they could take today that can help them understand, their sense of purpose, but also build a better relationship with themselves.
That's beautiful. And so I thought we had a really fascinating conversation. I never know exactly how things are going to go, but I just knew this was going to be great. Finding meaning in everyday moments. We covered that. Embracing imperfection, get rid of that perfection syndrome, Barbie doll, and building inner strength through stillness, energy, and discipline. And then we wrapped it up with her book, which is the embodiment of all of this and more. So that's a wrap for today. I want to thank you, Saori, for being here and for sharing your wisdom and your insight, and now your book. And so with that, I want to say that it's a wrap, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share with friends about the Samurai Way. Mata ne. Bye-bye. And that's a wrap for today's episode, The Samurai Way. I hope you found a little inspiration, a new perspective, or just something to reflect upon as you go about your day. Now remember, the samurai spirit isn't just about history. It's about how you show up, face challenges, and live with purpose. Whether it's Ikigai guiding your path or a little extra ganbaru pushing you forward, keep walking strong. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a review. It really helps. And if you've got some thoughts, questions, or you just want to connect, just contact me. So until next time, stay focused, stay determined, and keep living with purpose. Mata ne.